shared the screen, so you should just 1 second. Let me turn off my video so that the screen comes. Are you folks able to see the title card of the PowerPoint that I'm sharing?
Yes,
Yes,
yes.
it's visible. Yeah.
All right, so let's begin with that. We have with us about five of you. All right, so today is the third session of the OD and Change elective subject. Um, like always, before we get on to the actual session itself, let's do a quick recap. If you remember last week, I had mentioned that on any slide which has a toolbox, this is a handy reminder for you that as trainers or trainers in training, that doing a quick recap before the start of any program is a good way to bring everyone onto the same page, especially if we've had any absentees in the previous session, or also just to refresh our minds about what we did and where we stopped off. So over the last couple of weeks, one of the themes that we've been trying to emphasize is that we don't want to be, like the person who has only a hammer as his or her tool, because when one has just one tool, one ends up employing or advocating or using that tool for pretty much everything, and so that limits the way you solve problems, or in fact it limits the way you even perceive problems. So the goal of this particular or the way in which I've thought about this program or this particular course is to try and help you understand some of the fundamental concepts in OD and change, so that once you're clear with the fundamentals, then you can go ahead and design your own methods if you need to, right? So someone who knows why something has to be done can come up with creative ways to solve that particular problem, as opposed to someone who just has learned how to use one particular tool. And last week we did discuss that someone who gets a certification in a particular psychometric tool ends up advocating that for pretty much every problem. All right, so a quick reminder again that we are talking about planned organization change in this particular course, and not change that an organization has to go through as a reaction to some catastrophe or disaster that has happened. That requires a different type of outlook. So planned organization change is managing the future from the present. That is being able to envision what the future will look like, and then putting plans in place in order to accomplish that particular future vision. We looked at the definition of organization change. Those of you who read the assigned reading that has been posted on that's available to you on your dashboard uh, will see that the definition of change over there is slightly different, but the essence is the same, that there is planning involved, that it is not an ad hoc or a shooting in the dark sort of approach, but a planned approach to alter components of the organization in order to make the organization more effective, to meet some particular goal, or to accomplish certain objectives. We also looked at McKinsey's 7S framework, and you will notice that there is the toolbox in the top right hand corner uh, to give you an indication that this is a useful tool for you to use in trying to understand the components that need to be changed in your change program, and how there are how all the other components interact with each other. And so you have to be aware that making a change in any of the components will have an impact on other components as well. We try to understand why we need to change, or why organizations go about you know undergoing change. And we talked about two different ways in which you can look at it. One is that change is motivated by adversity in the present. That adversity can mean anything. It can mean competition, it can mean technological innovations, it can mean a new competitor. It could mean pretty much anything, as long as it's a reaction to what is happening in the present. Also, it is a preparation for the future. And more forward looking organizations who take the time to look at their past, scan the environment, look at the context in which their organizations exist, and then try and have a vision for the future. The second one was a more academic view, which talks about uh, two types of drivers: theory E and theory O. So over here, let me just pause for a bit and ask you if one of you can tell me or share with the group your understanding of what this theory E and theory O means. Just unmute yourself, and if you can share with us what is your understanding of theory E and theory O.
So did Arpita here? Uh,
Hi, Arpita.
Hi. From my understanding, theory E is more monetary focused, whereas which would probably look at productivity, bottom line, and things like that. And also for motivation of employees, they may use more monetary rewards. Theory O is, on the other hand, I'm assuming more developmental focus or people focus with more engagement and other forms of rewards perhaps to motivate them.
Very good, very good, excellent, Arpita. Thank you. Just to add to theory O, it is not just development of people, but also developing other capabilities within the organization. So it could just mean that you're trying to bring in a new type of technology, or you're investing in R&D, or maybe you're relocating your organization to be closer to the customer or to the production facility or anything, right? So anything that goes to develop or improve the capability of the organization to deal with any sort of event in the future would come under theory O. So yeah, thank you, Arpita, for that. And then we also talked about when organizations should change. And one of the key points over here, I mean, like, this is a broad generalization of what the trajectory of an organization would be if they got caught up with just uh, you know uh, doing what they are doing without making alterations along the way. When an organization does not do that, it usually plateaus off after the initial surge in growth. And when nothing is done, it eventually declines and dies. And so we talked about how uh, the organization has to change when it is doing really well. And we also recognize that that is a hard thing to do, simply because it's harder to sell a need for change when things are going really well. But true organizational leadership would mean that the leaders are keenly aware of what is going on in their context, are able to build or cultivate a culture that learns and is open to change at any time, especially when growth is on the higher trajectory. I shared a tool to do a quick assessment on, what is your existing state in the organization, to see if you're ready for a change, or if there is a need for a change. Again, there is a toolbox over here that indicates that this is a tool that you can use. All right. So here's let me kind of like pause a bit. So one of the things is I've been trying to share the slides and the additional readings that I said that I would share with you. But the way in which the Google Classroom interface is set up is that anything that I post on that Google Classroom is available to pretty much everyone who's registered, uh, you know, for the diploma program. I am not very keen on that kind of sharing. So if you folks can share with me your email address, specifically if you have a Gmail address, I will share with you a link to the Google Drive on which I will be posting all these presentations as well as all the additional readings, including a couple of case studies that I promised I will send you. So, all right. So Ajay has shared, Arpita has shared. Okay. Let me make a quick note of it so that I can share those things with you. So, Abhay, is that email address correct? Okay, so I have made a note. I just want Abhay to reconfirm whether his email address is correct. Okay. All right. So this is something that we looked at, which is a handy tool for you to use uh, when you're trying to make an assessment of whether your organization needs a change. All right. So you have made a correction. It's Gmail. Okay. So within 2 minutes of wrapping up the session today, I will send you all a link uh, to the Google Drive folder. Okay. We also looked at the types of change, 4 types of change that organizations can go through: structural change, change in a particular process or a procedure, change in the culture itself, or a change that focuses purely on cutting costs. Uh, Again, another tool for you to use was a way to assess the readiness for change in an organization. So there's this formula that was has been developed by this guy called David Gleicher, and the formula is fairly intuitive, right? So in the sense that if change needs to happen, the beginning is that there has to be some level of dissatisfaction with the status quo, and which is why it is difficult to make any change when the going is really good in an organization. So there has to be some dissatisfaction with the present state. There has to be a clear vision for the future or what your desired goal is, and also what practical steps do you have in place to begin that journey of reaching your goal. So all 3 of them have to be in place because it's a product. So DVF is a product. If any one of them is a zero, then the whole equation will be zero, and that product has to be greater than the resistance that you will face to change or the cost of embarking on that change. So this is a quick way in which you can assess readiness for change in your particular organization. We also defined organization culture. We spent some time on that, and we said it is basically the shared basic assumptions, right? So at the what culture says is, what are things that we take for granted, that we don't talk about every day, but it is understood. So this a basic assumption is that nobody talks about it every day, but everyone knows that that is the way things work. So think about what are the things that are understood in India right now from a cultural standpoint, or forget about India in as a country, because that's a little uh, complex. Let's take your organization itself. So someone who works for a say a public sector company versus a privately owned private company, right? And not a public limited company. So someone who works for a founder owned company knows, even though it is never articulated on a daily basis, that they can never be the head of the company or the CEO of the company, because it's always going to be the founder or the founder's children or relative who will end up being the top boss, right? So that's a basic assumption over there. uh, and there could be organizations where uh, the culture is one where the owner is very particular about uh, maintaining tight control over cost. So that particular aspect need not be talked about every day, but it is understood that if you spend more than what you're allowed to, then that will not be looked upon favorably by the bosses. On the other hand, in a public sector company, especially one that has multiple units, one of the unsaid assumptions is like, if you don't, if you rub your boss the wrong way or someone in authority the wrong way, then you could be transferred somewhere. Nobody tells it every day, but that's a basic understanding. So a culture, organization's culture is a shared assumption, shared basic assumption that people in that organization have learned over time as they have solved problems. And in that process of solving the problem, they have realized that, hey, this is good enough, that it is valid for a large number of circumstances. So let us teach this to any newcomer. And over time, that builds up, right? So which also means that the older an organization is, uh, the stronger some of the basic assumptions are. Meaning to say that if you want to change some aspect of the organization's culture, it's going to be so much more harder, right? So, and we also looked at the levels of culture. And for this, we used Ed Shine's typology of three levels of culture: artifacts, espoused beliefs and values, and underlying assumptions. So let me take a pause here and get some feedback or comments or observations from you about the three levels of culture, right? Is this particular slide clear? Do you understand it? Do you want me to explain any aspect of it? Please unmute yourself and ask a question, or feel free to uh, message in the chat box.
Hello, sir.
Hi,
Hi.
Deepak. Go ahead,
Yes,
Deepak.
this is Deepak. Sir, I was I couldn't attend the last session, though it's self-explanatory, something that I see. But still, in case if you could elaborate it, maybe in a couple of minutes, what exactly was discussed, that would be great.
I'd be happy to do that. All right.
Thank you.
So, in the previous slide, we said that culture is a pattern of shared basic assumptions that a group has learned and has considered it valid and is taught and teaches it to newcomers. Now, uh, so at how do you know about culture, right? So how do you know about culture? Uh, what Ed Shine says is culture can be assessed or can be understood uh, at three levels. One is what we see, the topmost level, right? So if you consider this iceberg as the metaphor, what we see is that the topmost portion or the artifacts, the behaviors, systems, policies, and processes are just the tip of the iceberg. And we know that 9/10 of the iceberg is actually underwater, meaning to say, what is readily visible to you is not the full picture about a culture, right? So, say, for example, what is readily visible is where the organization's office is located, right? Is it in the fancier part of the city, or is it on the outskirts, or in some godforsaken place? uh, you know how does the building look? Is it an old dilapidated building, built in the socialist era, or is it a fancy glass and steel structure, uh, with modern amenities and has a very multinational sort of a look? uh, how do you get treated at the reception when you walk in? uh, or even, like, is there adequate parking space, or do you have to find parking on the street or public parking? All those little things that are readily visible, right? What kind of uniform do people wear? If at all they wear a uniform? uh, is it do people dress casually to work, or are they in formal attire? uh, what kind of attire? Things that you can see. uh, how readily do they advertise? Do you see big billboards, or have you never seen a billboard of this particular company before? So these are the big things that you can see, readily see. You don't have to make much of an effort, right? So this information about the artifacts is easier to acquire, but it is harder to decipher, because you're trying to understand, what does this all mean? Does wearing a suit and tie mean that they are professional, or is it just a suit and tie that they are wearing? It's hard to kind of make out. At the second level is what we say, or what the company says, and this is usually conveyed through its vision statement, its mission statement. You read the annual report of that company, and it tells you a whole bunch of things about what they care about, their CSR initiatives. You see pictures of their CEO or some top executive being involved in some community organization, or hanging around with politicians or local leaders, whatever, right? So those things give you information about what they say about themselves, right? So this is what they say about themselves. And then at the bottom third is what they actually believe in. What are those underlying assumptions, those taken for granted beliefs that no one talks about on a daily basis, but is actually the ultimate source of the action, right? So let's kind of just use one of the examples I gave you earlier. Is, if I'm working for a founder run company, where the founder is still alive, then lot of the culture in that organization is going to be directly correlated with what the company's founder believes as are his values, right? So if the founder is conservative, then the company's culture is conservative. If the founder is a little more open-minded, then the company can be a little more open-minded, right? So these are the three levels at which an organization's culture can be observed, right? uh, and the as you go below the iceberg, uh, it's harder to understand, like, harder to get at information about these things. For example, how do I try and understand what is the taken for granted belief in an organization? I can't do that just by reading what they say about themselves in their annual report, or by looking at their building. I'll have to spend time with them. I'll have to engage in business with them. So when I know that, hey, every time I submit my invoice and the contract says that the invoice will be paid within 7 days of receipt of the invoice, and these people actually pay it up before the seventh day, you know that they have a certain value for keeping up their word, as opposed to another company which asks for 15 days but never makes a payment even after 45 days, right? So then you start wondering what their value system really is, even though publicly they say great things about themselves. Okay. All right, so I hope that is clear. Do you have any questions? I'd be happy to explain a little more.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much.
All right. Thanks, Deepak, for the question. All right. So far, uh, we've looked at 7 different things. In fact, we did a couple of other things as well in the first session, which was we tried to, we had the ground rules activity as well, right? So besides that, purely from a content perspective, we've looked at 7 different things. And again, there's a toolbox that's appearing on your top right hand corner, which is that you should be able to use a summary, be able to summarize what has happened at some point in order to recalibrate, bring everyone on the same page, make sure people have not forgotten what we said 15 minutes earlier, right? So 7 different things that we've talked about so far. uh, let's look at this 7S framework one more time, right? So this is a particular tool that you can really use. One, you should get comfortable with it. So what I would recommend that you do is, for your own personal learning, is look the 7S framework online, right? So uh, if you type in McKinsey and 7S framework, go to the actual document that McKinsey company has put out, uh, that talks about the 7S framework. They have some examples, they have some videos, so it kind of helps you become familiar with this. In a program like this, there's only so much detail I can go in, right, given the time that we have to spend on this. All right, so these are the 7 different components in an organization that you should be aware of, and that you should factor in anytime you uh, embark on any kind of change initiative. The top half, strategy, structure, and systems, are generally referred to as the hard S's because they are more tangible, whereas the bottom half, skills, staff, and style, are more what is called soft S's, because they have a more intangible aspect to it. And all of them are driven by the shared values of the company. Okay, so the chapter that you were supposed to read for today, uh, I hope people have read it. Have you? You remember we were supposed to have a quiz on it? Say yes or no so that I know what's going on. Well, thank you, Neelam, for your honest admission that you couldn't read it. So if I gave a quiz today, that would be really sorry. Okay, so Arpita missed it as well. Okay, all right. So here's what we'll do. Lucky for you, I decided not to have the quiz today because I want to cover some more of the portions before we actually have a quiz. So we will definitely have a quiz next week. Okay, uh, so please review the material that I post on Google Drive today, as well as the chapter that is assigned to you, which is the chapter that is available on your dashboard on change management. It's a very good curation of uh, material on organization change. It's very logically laid out. It has some it has a useful set of checklists and toolkit at the end of the chapter. So read that, because if you don't read it, then you're missing out on some useful information. Don't rely purely on these sessions alone, because because of the time factor, I'm only going to be covering the big aspects, the big points, and not the details, right? So we will have the quiz next week. All right. uh, yes, I understand, Ajay, and I truly appreciate all of you folks who are doing this program in addition to your regular jobs, and that is a hard thing to do. I can empathize with you all on that, but we still have to make some time to get this thing going, simply because you've all paid up for this program, right? So you don't want your money to go waste. All right, so let's move forward. I want to spend some time just talking a little bit about organization design and structure, right? So in this McKinsey 7S framework, you see structure and systems are two aspects in the hard S's. Uh, Strategy itself, I mean, like, we can spend an entire program on strategy itself. So I'm not going to spend too much time on strategy, except to say that strategy is your plan for how you will accomplish your vision, right? So for example, if you say the vision for my company is that I want to become the number one revenue earner in my business. So if you're in software, I want to become a $10 billion company or whatever, right? So you have a vision. Your strategy is like, what action plan do you put in place to accomplish that vision? Very simplistically put. So I'm not going to cover or talk about strategy now. We look at structure and systems. So one of the things about organizations is that you have to have a particular structure in place in order to get the work done. So an organization's design or structure is basically a problem solving arrangement. For example, if I am in the business of like, say, making teacups, right? So I am a teacup maker, and that is my problem. I need to make these teacups of a certain quality at a certain price and ship it to places where my customers are. And my customers can either be located within the geography that I have my factory in, or they could be all over the world. And so the way I would define the problem of my making the teacup and selling the teacup will determine how my problem will be solved. So if I'm making teacups only for my local city, then the way I would go about manufacturing them, distributing and selling them will be very different from if I were making a teacup that I will sell to anywhere in the world, right? So what we need to understand about organization design and structure uh, is that they are basically problem solving arrangements, right? And it is very important that you are very clear about how you define and frame the problem, because the way you frame the problem will point you in the direction of how you will solve the problem. And organization structures include both the formal structure and what are called informal structures. Okay. uh, so what are formal structures, or what is a formal type of structure? uh, this particular typology is from a book called the SMS Blackwell Handbook of Organizational Capabilities. Uh, so this is the form of organization structure that one is most familiar with. This is also called the functional structure, which is you have the senior management at the top, and then you have functional silos. This could be operations, marketing, HR, quality, R&D, whatever. You pick what the function is. So this is the one of the pure types of an organization structure at one end. And on the other end, you see F over here, so which means there are 6 types of structures, formal structures. The 6th type is the project based organization, in which you have senior management and then you have different projects. So this could also be strategic business units or completely independent entities, that all independent entities in terms of how they are structured, how they generate their revenues and profits, and how they go about doing their business, as long as they all are linked to the same top management, right? SM is senior management over here. Now in between, you have a variety of mixes depending on uh, who has the higher say, whether it's the functional head or the project head. Okay. uh, so under the functional type, again, one other structure is the what is called the functional matrix, which is you have the functions, but there could be some projects that require cross-functional expertise, right? So the company is trying to explore a new market, so it puts together a small team of people drawn from different functional areas, who are sent off to do some exploration or to do some business development or whatever. In this functional matrix, the power still remains with the functional heads. The project heads really don't have too much power. When I say too much power, they do have some power, only to the extent that they have to complete that little assignment that they have been given. Another version of this functional matrix is also called the the balance matrix, where the project managers have a little more power than what you would see in a functional matrix, right? But they're more or less similar. They're more similar than dissimilar. On the other hand, looking at the project-based organizations, you have the project matrix, which is where both the functional heads and the project heads have more or less equal power and say in decision making and control over resources and people, right? So there is workforce being drawn from different functions, who can be moved from project to project. So there is a lot of interlacing over there. And then you have a project-led organization, where functional expertise is has a lesser power. So this project-led organization would be similar to your functional matrix, but just in the reverse. In the functional matrix, the functional heads have more power. In the project-led organization, the project heads have more power. And as we discussed earlier, the project-based organization is one where the project heads have all the power, right? So within that particular project, all of the functions are also embedded. So it's a complete organization on its own. So let me pause a bit and uh, see if you have any questions that I can clarify, or if you'd like to add something, or if you'd like to share what type of an organization you are working in. Where do you see your company structure fit in among the 6 different types that we are seeing on the screen? B type. Neelam says B type. Okay. Ajay says functional. So A. All right. So you can see how you can use this these different types as a way to understand what type of structure you're in, right? So this is more for understanding purposes. So which means that when you are trying to embark on a change, if you're moving from A to F, it's going to be a really hard effort to make, as opposed to moving from A to B or A to C, right? So within this cluster is going to be easier to make a change than moving from one cluster to the next cluster type. Does it make sense? Okay. So this is good for you to know as a foundational kind of aspect of formal structures. So these are what the authors call ideal types, right? So ideal types, so 6 ideal types are there, and every organization will kind of tweak it a little bit depending on what their unique circumstances require. Okay. Now, while you have formal structures on one side, you also have what are called informal structures. Now, this aspect of informal structure, which you probably, may be familiar as the grapevine in your organization, where how information flows. It need not necessarily flow strictly in the way the formal organization chart is laid out. So if you're in the formal organization chart, this is more of a functional, uh, you know, structure over here. You have the CEO, and then you have all the functional heads of software applications, field design. This is just an example that the authors Crackhart and Hansen have used in their article in HBR. Right. Actually, this is based on a study that they've done. They've changed the names a little bit to maintain confidentiality. So if this is the formal structure, uh, you know reporting is going to be vertically up this line. So everyone in this particular field design will report to Calder, who is the senior VP, and the other functional areas as well. So if somebody has to interact from field design to data control systems, it will go through Calder, right? So if Wilson wants to send something to Adkins, you know it will go through a formal process. Communication will have to be, through this, the lines that are there in the reporting. So uh, Wilson will have to keep Calder informed, or Calder needs to know what is going on between the way that his field design team and the data control systems team interact, right? So this is the formal structure. But what Crackhart and Hansen, they were able to study it. These things were known, have been known for a long time, that the communication flow operates completely different from the formal structure, right? But they were able to map it out, uh, you know, and kind of show how informal structures work. So what they did was they tried to, they took all these different people over here, and then they asked them, hey, they developed in social network analysis, there are methods by which you can map relationships, right? So and there are lots of software tools available to map networks. So all of these things were much before your social the media networks that we know now, such as Facebook or Twitter. And earlier there used to be things called Friendster, Hi-Fi, Orkut. Maybe those of you who used to use them at least 10-15 years ago will probably remember them. So so what they did was they asked these set of people, hey, whom do you trust in your organization? Okay. And so using the software that they used, they were able to map that advice network. So whom do you go and ask for advice? uh, what you can see is that people cut across these formal structures to go and ask for advice. Okay. uh, so for example, over here, the Calder and Harris seem to be central figures because they have more number of inward arrows, right? So the direction of the arrow indicates who is asking whom for advice. So in this particular case, I hope you can see my cursor. Lee, the arrow goes from Lee to Calder. So Lee is asking Calder for advice. There are also double-headed arrows, for example, over here between Thomas and Harris, uh, which indicates that both Thomas and Harris have a mutual relationship in terms of seeking out advice. Now, the formal structure would say that the heads of the department or the functional heads were supposed to be the experts. But what we see over here is that while Calder seems to be one of the experts, Harris is another expert. In the formal structure, Harris is someone who reports to Calder, right? And people from across the organization seem to reach out to Harris. There's another person, Ruiz. The CEO really has only like 4 or 3 arrows coming in. Only 3 people seem to ask the CEO for advice. Okay, so informal structures also exist in organizations. So one way to map that is to ask who do you go for advice. Another is whom do you trust, right? So whom do you trust? And again, we see that Benson seems to be a central figure in terms of who is trusted. Uh, Calder has become a peripheral figure over here. While people go to Calder for advice, they don't necessarily trust Calder, right? So that gives you a lot of insight into what the company is about, even in advice. So say, for example, Harris is someone who reports to Calder, but a lot of people are coming to Harris. So that also indicates a bottleneck, which maybe this person has not been placed in the appropriate job. Uh, so mapping out informal structures can give you information and insight about all of these different little different things. So they also mapped out, how the CEO views the trust network. Okay, so this is a general trust network. This is how the CEO views the trust network, and he believes, this is his perception, the CEO's perception. I don't know. It is her perception that Calder is the central figure. Okay, uh, but we know from this particular map that Calder is actually a very peripheral figure. When they actually ask Calder, what he or she thinks of the trust network, Calder only said that, hey, if at all there is any trust, the trust is only between these 2 guys, these 2 persons, Fleming and Haberman. They totally missed out all the others. All right, so here's the takeaway from this. When we talk about organization design and structure, we are saying that an organization design is basically a problem solving arrangement, and the way you frame your problem will decide how you will put the systems in place to solve the problem. You have to be aware that there are formal structures as well as informal structures. And why are these structures important? When you embark on a change initiative, there is information and communication that flows through the formal structure, but there is also information and communication that will flow through informal structures, right? So, for example, if there is a rumor about some impending change in the organization, people will immediately reach out to the others in the organization that they trust to find out what is going on, and also to some certain others for advice on what to do if or when the change happens. So for people who are interested in undertaking organization change, one has to be aware of these things, right? That you have to pay attention to the formal as well as the informal structures within an organization. Like I said earlier, there is no single ideal organizational design or structure. Every organization must develop its own structure to solve what it defines as the organizational problem. Okay. So let me pause over here and see if you have any questions, or if you want me to explain something in a little more detail, I'll be happy to do that. And also, if you have, what do you think of informal structures within the organization that you are part of? You can either unmute yourself and talk, or message in the chat box. Okay, so let's move on. I'm kind of assuming there are no questions as of now, but don't feel bashful. If you have any questions, feel free to ask. We are all here for learning purpose only, so that should be fine. All right, so we've looked at some fundamental aspects of organization change. We've tried to ask, what is organization change, why should organization change, when should organization change, how do you assess whether there is need for organization change, and also whether an organization is ready for change. We looked at organization culture and why that is important, what are the different levels of culture. We've looked at the 7S framework to understand organizational components, and we've also looked at organization structure. Uh, right. So Arpita makes a point that says an open, transparent communication is essential to reduce impact of grapevine. Very right. Right. So the more transparently the leadership communicates, the grapevine has lesser influence, and the inverse is true, which is, if the leadership is tight-fisted about sharing information, more rumors are likely to be spread. Okay, so in thinking about change within organizations, we obviously have the 7S framework that says, here are these 7 different components. What underlies all of that is that change begins with individuals. That is, we will have to start changing the people if you want any organization change effort to be effective, right? So we know from the 7S framework that people, the organization, the soft S's, the style, staff, and skills, all of them have people involved. And so unless people start changing, the end goal of that change initiative is not going to be accomplished, right? So for any organization change to take place, one of the fundamental requirements is that individuals will have to change. Okay, and so let's spend a few minutes on understanding individual change. So first off, individual change should occur at 3 levels. One is cognition. Cognition simply means like knowledge. What do I know? What do I understand? Right. So, uh, is the rationale for the change clear to me? What am I being told about the change that this organization is going to undertake? What reasons are being given? Uh, so the thinking part, right? Uh, that is one of the levels at which individuals can change. So I know this, I understand this. hey, I know the company is not doing well, there are competitors over here, there's a new government policy, there's a new technological advancement that has happened. So I understand the need for change, right? So when people get to that level, then they are more likely to start taking ownership of the change and acting towards making things better. But when people don't understand uh, what is going on, then that becomes a problem, because that is when rumors start floating around, and people will believe anything that will validate what they're thinking and feeling. Okay, so the second level of change is behavior, which is people will have to start acting in different ways. So if the change initiative requires that a new machine be installed, or a new system or process be installed, it also implies that the people running these machines, or people who are involved in these systems and processes, will also have to make changes to their behaviors, right? So if the machine requires that I wear a certain personal protective equipment, or that I go and acquire some additional training, I have to show that in my behavior, that I actually am wearing the PPE, or that I've gone and attended a particular additional training program, right? So that is behavior. And the third level is change in my perceptions, or the values and my beliefs, essentially the attitude that I have towards this new way of doing something. All right. So these are the three levels at which change should occur in the individual. So let me pose a question to the group. Which of these three levels is easier to change relative to the others? All of them are hard, but which is easiest among these three options, or the three levels? Okay, so two people have said cognition, okay. Cognition, all right. So tell me something. Is it possible that uh, is it possible for everyone in the organization? Okay, so Arpita says attitude is most difficult. Okay, so that was not the question that I asked. Uh, but okay, so that element, that if attitude is eliminated, you have uh, this one between cognition and behavior, and pretty much everyone else has said cognition is the easiest of the three levels to change. Uh, okay, so would someone want to share with us why you think cognition is easier to change than behavior? Let's just assume for now that attitude is hardest. So between cognition and behavior, why you think cognition is easier? Unmute yourself and share. It's easier that way.
Okay, so Ted, this is Deepak.
Deepak, all right, Deepak.
Yeah, so cognition talks about what they know and understand.
Right.
And there's a difference between knowing and then doing. So that comes under behavior and attitude. So when a change takes place, people would know. Probably they are informed why the change has taken place. They would know the theory, all the other aspects that have been informed to them. But now when it comes to implementing those changes, then of course the behavior will kick in, and the attitude and values will kick in. Their previous experiences will kick in, and the way they had been doing things, that those things will be in place. So cognition, people would know and understand, but yes, and that would be, I won't say they would adopt it, but at least they would know it. Okay, fine. So this is something is required and why it's required. But behavior and attitude, until it comes in these two things, it's not going to bring the kind of change which really is required. That's my thought.
Okay, okay. Thanks for the input. Uh, Arpita says the resistance to change may continue even after knowing the reason for change. Okay, that's a useful insight, uh, which is that even though I know why I need to change, I might still resist it. Right. So that's the point that Arpita is making. Uh, all right. So just to kind of clarify a little bit, or like to say which one is the easier of the two between cognition and behavior, uh, what we know from research and practice is that it is easier and better to begin with behavioral change than cognition. I'm not saying that you should not worry about cognition change in cognition or understanding, but then it is easier to start getting people to behave differently than it is to start making them think differently. Okay. uh, so this is one of these counterintuitive things that successful change leaders have discovered, that even if I don't understand why I need to change, uh, if I start engaging in certain behaviors, right? So behaviors that are aligned with making the change successful, I start then understanding why the change is required. Because once I start seeing results, then my mind starts changing, right? Uh, an easy way to think about this is like this. Think about any of the rituals that you follow as part of your religious faith, right? So you probably started this off when you were quite young, uh, when your parents told you, hey, you have to fold your hands and say namaskar or namaste. Back in the day, you probably even didn't have any idea what that meant, but you did it anyway. People uh, who fall at the feet of the elders to take their blessings, you may not understand why you're doing it, but you do it because your parents told you to do it. Any of those rituals, they start off as behaviors, right? So over time and much later is when you actually fully realize and understand what is going on. And on a longer time frame is when that becomes an attitude of being respectful of elders, or being respectful of other people, or a particular ritual that you do in the morning. It starts as a behavior, and then you understand it. As something as simple as brushing your teeth. uh, as a kid, you maybe all of us resisted having a toothbrush stuck into our mouths, but we did it anyway, and then now we probably understand why dental hygiene is important, right? So to not belabor the point, the three levels at which individuals should change from a change management perspective, it is easiest to start with behaviors, cognition, and then the attitude. So they all kind of accumulate, and it is only when the behavior and the thinking are aligned that the attitudes also start changing. So that's individual change. So there is a need for any change management initiative to reduce the resistance to change and to increase the readiness to change, right? And we'll discuss how this can be accomplished. And also there's a fairly robust and pretty durable model for individual change that was put forward by this guy called Kurt Lewin, more than 70 years ago, which has actually stood the test of time in terms of how one goes about changing individuals. There are, other ways in which models that have come up but nothing that has stood the test of time, right? So Kurt Lewin's model of individual change that entails unfreezing old behaviors and old attitudes and old ways of thinking, changing uh, the uh, uh, the ways in which we think, behave, or perceive by learning new things or engaging in new things, and then refreezing whatever the new thinking, new action, or new attitude is. So we will look at this Kurt Lewin's model next week. But for now, what we will do is we'll take a look at how do I mean, the question I framed it as how do you react to change, but it could be as how do people react to change? Okay. So we'll spend some time on this before we wrap up for the day. So you again see there's a toolbox, okay, which means this is something that you can make use of when you are doing your own change thing. So one way to look at, how do people react to change? The assigned reading for you has a whole bunch of ways in which people will react to change. Okay, so it talks about denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance. Different ways in which people can react. Uh, but I'd like to introduce you to another way, which involves animals. So it's easier for us to remember and also to communicate. Okay. So we have 5 different animals. So if you can think of the animal and what the attributes of that particular animal are, then it becomes easier for you to remember how what are the different types of reactions people can have, right? So this particular framework was developed by this person called Heather Wishick. It's about 15 years old. Uh, it's useful simply because there is an image that you can anchor your uh, anchor yourself to, as opposed to just a series of text. So let's look at each of these different types of reactions that one can see to change. Uh, let's take the turtle, for example, for first. So the turtle, you tend to put your head down, draw yourself inward, and stay as quiet and still as possible until it becomes clear what the new direction and context and agenda are. You ask few questions and wait to be told what's emerging. Right? So think of the turtle and think of people who kind of go into their shells as soon as some change is announced, right? You're unsure of what is going on. uh, you don't want to draw too much attention to yourself because there is always this fear that change will mean something negative to me, or something negative might happen to me. My department could be merged with somebody else. I could lose my job. I could be transferred somewhere. I'll be asked to do something that I'm not comfortable doing. A whole bunch of things, we start fearing. And so the reaction to change, or the resistance to change, is mostly because we are uncertain about what is going to happen, right? If we are certain, then it's easier to square ourselves to uh, deal with it. But if we are not certain, that becomes a little bit of a problem. So one type of reaction is like the turtle. You retreat into your shell, right? You become quiet, you just wait, stay under the radar, wait to see what goes on. And then when things start becoming clearer, then you emerge, right? So that is the turtle. And then you have the hawk. The hawk, as you know, flies above, and so has the ability, or has the perspective to see from a distance. It can see the entire way in which the change is kind of happening or taking place. From the distance, you can see all the moving parts, you get the big picture. uh, and because of the vantage point that you enjoy, you can see the pattern that is emerging with the change. So which means you're in a better position to ask questions, and also to analyze what is going on. So one type of reaction is the hawk. The third one is the lion. The lion, uh, king of the jungle, the leader sort of thing. You care about the group. Uh, you give them some confidence, some protection. You try and explain things to them. You try and reassure them. Uh, and kind of just kind of give them some sort of uh, I wouldn't call a security blanket, but you try and help them understand what is going on, right? So that is the lion. You have the deer. You try and find some safety, feel skittish and distracted, try to find a safe place and to hide, and yet keep on the move, trying to figure out whom to ally with, sniffing the air for danger, asking others what they think, and try to listen to everything that's said. Right. So if the turtle on the one hand retreats into its shell, the deer is one who is like, moving around, trying to find out some information, trying to see where this change thing is going to go, see if there are people that you can form a coalition with or you can ally with. uh, you're always on the seeking out information, trying to figure out what is going on. Fifth type is the elephant. Elephants, as we all know, are legendary for having long memories, right? So you remember where you and the group have been. You carry extra load for others while they are distracted. Stay strong while others are upset, and remind people of what's always been important. So while the elephant is a towering presence. Uh, it can be the voice of reason sort of things where you try and remind people that what has the history of the organization been, and you know whether you should rush in and do this particular change or not. And also, you carry some extra load, you help people. uh, you are the rock that sort of people can rely upon. Okay. So these are the different ways in which uh, different reactions that you can expect to a change. Anything from withdrawing into one's shell to uh, the deer who is constantly on the move trying to figure out what is going on. There could be other reactions to change as well, which are not captured in this typology that Heather Wishik has come up with. One reaction to change is that you remove yourself from the organization itself. So you decide to quit, right? So you resign and you go find opportunities elsewhere. So this reaction that we see on the screen is more for people who choose to stay within the organization. So let's see what are the, if you can call it, the pros and cons, or um, the contributions, or some shortcomings of each of these types of reactions. Okay. And one thing we should kind of remember is it's not that every person is going to be purely one of these types. With time, one can move from being a turtle to being even a lion or a hawk or whatever, depending on what kind of information we have, and uh, how we go about processing the information that we receive. So let's take the turtle first. The turtle, or the reaction that typifies the turtle, is one that contributes calm, quiet, and patience to the group. Because you're not skittish, you're not anxious, that provides a little bit of calm, slows things down a little bit so that people can take a beat and try and understand what is going on and not get too worked up. The flip side is that you can seem uncommitted. You may fail to contribute good ideas in a timely manner because you're trying to engage in self-preservation. You're just trying to look after yourself over here. The hawk, because of the vantage point, contributes systemic thinking, analysis, and a non emotional response simply because you're able to see the big picture. And because you see the big picture, you have a better feeling of control over things. You know where things are going. Uh, but one of the things is because you understand what is happening, you are dispassionate about it. But those who are at the ground level, who are having to deal with the situation on a daily basis, can find you to be, can find you to be a little insensitive to the emotions that they are going through or what they care about. So there is a likelihood of you kind of alienating your colleagues a little bit. The lion helps the group feel safer, helps individuals feel part of the group and remain productive because you're providing the reassurance and saying, hey, I'm behind you, don't worry about it. Let's face this change together. Uh, Again, with all of these kinds of reactions, is that you can tend to be a little bossy, uh, too directive. You may prevent some experiments with new directions because you're trying, hey, I will protect you in the way in which we are already being doing something. The deer contributes heightened attentiveness, alertness, sees and hears details, so has a lot more information, uh, is keenly hooked into what is going on, which also can mean that because a lot of time and effort is being spent in gathering all this information, you can become less productive, become distracted, and also, uh, be interruptive of others who are trying to get work done. The elephant reaction contributes history, values, sense of continuity, and hard work. But in talking about, how it was in the olden days, there could be an implied resistance to doing things in new ways, and also because of the burden that you carry of trying to take everyone along, you could become exhausted or overloaded, right? So when we talk about change, we are saying that individual change is essential for changes at any other level within the organization. And it's important for us to have a sense of how people will react to change. What I have presented over here are 5 different ways in which people can react. And we've used these animals as anchors for us to remember, right? So tomorrow, when you have to think about, hey, what are the different ways in which people will react to this change that I'm trying to propose, if you can start remembering these animals and what they are descriptive of, or what they seem to typify, then that'll help you figure out how you can deal with that particular change. So how can you deal with the reaction of the turtle? How can you deal with the reaction of the hawk, or the lion type, or the deer type, or the elephant type? All right. So with that, let me pause and take any questions you might have. If you need some clarifications, if you have some observations to make, if you have undergone, if you have been at the receiving end of a change initiative, what type of reaction did you have? Um, and do you see this as a useful way to uh, think about or try and remember how people would react to change?
Sir, I have a real example which I would like to share with you and try to understand that what kind of behavior or attitude is this towards the change. Because
Okay,
if you allow me to, sir, please.
absolutely. Please go ahead.
So, in this kind of a pandemic situation,
Hmm.
every organization is fighting to survive or to exist or to prove that yes, he can do better. Okay.
Hmm. Okay.
Similarly, kind of medical device organization that I am also working in this organization also there is a requirement of increasing in the amount of revenue generation or meeting the sales. But said and done, the targets and everything are gone to toss because of this COVID kind of scenario. Okay.
Okay.
Uh, the kind of organization I am having is functional, wherein there are head of the organizations are taking the entire decisions, and marketing strategy and all those things are just fundas which are taken care by only these two directors. Okay.
Okay.
So in that kind of scenario, when there are a lot of ideas that they are asking, and when we are giving the ideas to bring about a change for requirement, first of all, the those ideas are negated, not accepted, and finally, when uh, ground reality hits to them, they say that okay, this kind of things also should be done or would be required. Even
Mm-hmm.
if even if we give a kind of futuristic idea or futuristic things, they are not ready to accept it first of all. Okay.
Okay.
And going ahead, they do are looking forward for a desperate kind of a change, which they themselves do not know how to change, where to change, and how to bring about that change also. So looking at what you have taught me right now in these kind of behaviors, these kind of animals, what kind of animal would be more suitable for these kind of people who are not ready for that kind of a changes, or going ahead for that kind of changes, and how should I as a person should be able to deal them?
Very, very good question. Uh, Very good question. So, uh, because we have only a couple of minutes left, Ajay, is it okay if we take this question at the beginning of the next class? Because
Yeah, sure,
as a
sir, sure.
continuation of this particular, uh, slides, we will talk about how to deal with those kind of people. Yeah. So broadly, the way you've described, it seems like the resistance to ideas from uh, people. You know, uh, at the moment I don't see any of these animals trying to explain that fully. Okay, maybe a little bit of the elephant over there seems to be there in terms of resisting new ways of doing things, probably because they uh, have this baggage of history with them. So the leaders that you're talking about, maybe they have some baggage uh, that is preventing them from accepting the suggestions that are being given to them. um, but let's try and explore this in a little more detail in the next session. Is that okay?
Yeah, okay, sir. Okay.
All right. But thank you for the question. And do remember to bring it up when we start next week's session.
Sure,
Okay.
sir.
All right. Thank you so much, folks. So let me kind of just put this out again and say we will have the quiz next week. Okay. So the quiz, okay, let me kind of just to allay any apprehensions of yours you might have. Uh, the quiz is more a way for us to uh, engage in discussion. Okay, so this is not a quiz where I'm going to test to see like, hey, I'm going to give you marks and all those things. That's not the intent of the quiz. The quiz is more to uh, prompt the way different ways in which we can think and discuss the issues that are there in this change management leadership guide that you've been assigned, and also the materials that we've covered in class in the first three sessions. Okay, so we will do that next week. I would request all of you to please read up and come, because that is going to be very helpful. Because if you don't read up, it uh, well, it is not going to be helpful. All right, is that a commitment that we can make to ourselves? All right, so Ajay says yes. Thank you, Ajay, and I hope all the others will read up and come as well. Okay, so I'm very mindful of the time. It's 7:30 now. I know all of you have had long days and would like to get back to, uh, you know, uh, winding up for the day. So thank you very much, everyone. I look forward to seeing you all next week. If you have any questions, we can. I'll probably spend a minute discussing it, or we can meet up next week.